Okay, this is the next to last class. Next week we finish up. And a lot of this week, I mean, both this week and next week, there's a lot of loose ends in the story that all come together. Right now, sort of the end of the story, and then next week, basically how it's established as a holiday, though that starts here as well. So, welcome, everybody. Good to see everybody. And okay, so we are starting in Perek Tet. We had a couple psukim we didn't finish, and I think we're on Pasuk Tet Vav. Just to recap where we were. So Esther had to plead to reverse Haman's decree. Achashverosh said, anything but that. I'm on your side, but yeah, I can't reverse the decree. So the ruse or the plan was to have the Jews be able to defend themselves and to fight against their enemies. And in the meantime, with a show that the king prefers the Jews over their enemies. So that's essentially where it was. And at the end, when they sent out the letters with this new decrees, that's where we are. They had to just have this meeting, and now in Pasuk Tetvav Mordechai Yatzan Lifnei HaMelech B'levush Malchut Chelet V'chur V'ater Zahav Gdola V'tachich Botz V'Argaman V'Eir Shushan Sahala V'Sameha. So Mordechai went out from before the king with a royal clothing of blue and white, and a great golden crown, and a mantle of linen and purple. And the city of Shushan was joyful and happy. Okay, happy and joyful. However you want to translate Sahala. Yeah. So the simple reading is Mordechai, again, for the second time, is going out with Belevush Malchut, but this time it's for real, right? So that the first one was sort of foreshadowing what would happen. That's the simple pshat. It's obviously a show of favor. Everybody should know that he's not just the prime minister, but he's also the favorite of the king. The king is doing him special favor. We didn't read this about Haman, right? That Haman was brought out in Levush Malchut. I'm just thinking it's very interesting. You probably know there's I think it's a Mishnah Avot in Pirkei Avot that if you chase leadership, so leadership runs away from you, and if you run away from a leadership, that's when you're going to be sought out as a leader. And so we see that Haman, who ran after this Levush Malchut, he never got it. He only was able to give it to Mordechai for a day, and Mordechai doesn't aim for it and yet gets it effortlessly. First time just for show, for a special reward. Now more permanently. It's not the same. It's interesting. It's not the same language of Keter, right? Before we had Keter, now it's Ateret, which is a different word for a crown. My guess is that it's not quite as fancy, sort of like the Kohen Gadol versus the regular Kohanim. They both have hats, but they're different. So here too, I imagine that it's some sort of lesser crown. And again, the city of Shushan, we saw this before. It doesn't tell us if it's the Jews in Shushan, or it appears that there's many Jews in Shushan, but is that the case for all the people or just the Jews? Not clear. Different commentators say different things. Also, just one more thing you should know, the Gra brings down Midrash Chazal, that this is all describing Mordechai's being dressed in talit and tefillin, right? All these are code words for, I mean, some of them are more obvious than others, like tchelet. Tchelet is the blue of the tzitzit, right? The ateret is the tefillin shel rosh, even though the problem is it's ateret zahav. So on a pshat level, it's a very difficult thing to say, which is presumably why Rashi doesn't say it. So let's go on. Then a famous line, right? Leudim ha'itorav simchos son ve'ikar, right? And the Jews had light and joy and happiness and glory. Right. So what's all these different things? So again, the Gra cites the Midrash that's all referring to different mitzvot like Torah, Milah, etc. Others say, I think the Al-Sheikh says that it's talking about a gradual process, that even though the turnabout was very dramatic, right, for the Jews to be fully confident in Achashverosh and what's going to happen in Shushan took some time, right? If you can imagine, right, the one day you're under a death sentence, and the next day Mordechai comes out as the leader. And yet, even as he comes out as the leader, the situation is still not completely clear because Achashverosh did not repeal the first decree of Haman. So there's still some haze, but things move forward. We'll see that in a couple of psukim with Mordechai as well. Okay, next verse, last verse in the perek. V'chol medina medina v'chol ir ve'ir makom asher dvar melech v'dato megia simcha sason liyudim mishte v'yom tov v'rabim ma'am ha'aretz mityahadim ki nafal pachad hayudim aleihem. So in every province and every city, the place where the word of the king and his law reached or reaches, there was joy and happiness for the Jews, a party or drinking and a festival day, and many of the people of the land, I'm not going to translate that because there's different opinions, mityahadim, obviously the literal meaning is they made themselves like Yehudim, or they made themselves. No, it's not true. They made themselves Yehudim. That's what it means literally, because the fear of the Jews was upon them. Okay, so now you're a commentator. You have to make sense of this word. I just told you what it meant. Mityahadim. They made themselves Yehudim. How are you going to understand that? What does that mean? What does that word mean? I mean, there's the simplest thing to say is like Rashi. What's the simplest thing to say? You can look at Rashi.
That they converted.
Yeah, they converted. It says mitgairim, right? That's the simplest thing, right? How do you make yourself a Yehudi? So you convert, right? Why do other Meforshim not say that? What's the problem with that? Why not say?
Because maybe in the history it shows it like the entire they didn't convert.
Sorry, what are you saying? In history they didn't convert? I didn't understand.
Like, don't we know that like in history, like the entire nation didn't like all convert?
Yeah, well, it doesn't say everybody. It says Rabbeim me'am ha'aretz, sort of like the Eruv Rav, right? Many from the peoples of the land, right? So it's saying lots of people were mityahed. So I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. We don't have a record of like with the Eruv Rav, we don't have much of a record after this. So that's a good point. But textually, textually is one thing. It's first of all, it's what it doesn't say. What doesn't it say?
Doesn't say that they converted.
Right, it's like mitgairim, right? Why this funny word? So we know that Megillat Esther uses words that were common during that time, right, and weren't necessarily common at other times. And at the beginning, we spoke about how Yehudi started meaning Jewish, because Yehudi does not define our religion. Yehudi, the word Yehudi literally means Judean, right? We saw that when Mordecai is described as a Yehudi, they wanted to know, is he actually a Judean, or is he a Jew as we use the word? So around this time, people started using this word for Jews because the surviving Jews were all Judeans, meaning they lived in Malchut Yehuda, which consisted of Yehuda Benjamin and other people, some, a large number of Levim and Kohanim, same thing, all from Levi, and a few refugees and tradesmen from other Shvatim. But they all belong to Malchut Yehuda. In fact, Yisrael, which is the normal name for the Jewish people, right, became the name of the northern kingdom, which is the 10 tribes that disappeared. So you could say, and Rashi would say, well, it's a new word, and that's what they used. That's what, to become Jewish. That's how you said it. You didn't say the word mitgayer, which in any case, I don't know. I'm trying to think if we have the word mitgayer in Tanakh. It certainly describes the process better, right? Because litgayer is to convert, to become a ger. On some level, you can't really become a Yehudi, right? Because Yehudi is more racial than about religion. So it's unclear. So in any case, other Mefarshim say other things. So I don't know if you saw in the Gra, he says that the Jews did not accept them, right? And he explains why. And the truth is, you can see from this pasuk why. Why not, based on this pasuk, would they not accept them?
The motivation to convert would have been fear.
Right, that's right. Okay. We want people to convert for the right reason. Okay. And particularly, there's an idea when the Jews have it well, like in Malchut David and Shlomo, they wouldn't accept converts by and large, right? There's also a question of that. Some they did, but by and large, they wouldn't, because the idea was people were converting because it was very good to be Jewish. So here too, that would seem to be a mitigating factor. But in any case, so the Gra says mityahadim. I don't know if anybody sees the Gra. He says that they didn't accept them, and he gives all sorts of reasons. One which we just talked about, and then he says ulachach kativ mityahadim. That's why the fact that they weren't accepted. That's why it says they made themselves, right? It's hitpa'el. They made themselves Jews. That's not how you become a Jew. Right? You don't make yourself a Jew, right? You have to be made by the Beit Din, by the Jewish people. So what does this mean? So it says Sha'asu atzman ki-Yehudim, so they made them, so they acted like Jews, but they weren't actually Jewish, right? And presumably, historically, what Zelda was talking about before, presumably that's why we don't read more about them. So it sounds like there's a lot of them that did this, but presumably that didn't last for very long. Okay, so let's continue. Right, famous pasuk that we like to sing. One second. Yeah. So first pasuk in Perek Tet, right? B'shnei-masar chodesh chodesh Adar, b'shlosha-asar yom bo, asher הגיע דבר המלך ודעתו להעשות ביום אשר סיברו אויבי היהודים לשלוט בהם, ונהפוך הוא אשר ישלטו היהודים הם ובשונאיהם. So on the 12th month, right, which is the month of Adar, told you to keep noticing this. I don't think we're going to get to the point this class, but I think next class you'll see what this is all about. On the 13th day in it, where the word of the king and his law reached to be done, on the day that the enemies of the Jews looked forward to controlling them or to lishlot. I mean, in modern Hebrew, we talk about controlling shlita, but it's more than that. It's to dominate, to dominate them. And it was reversed that the Jews dominated over their haters. Now, the Gra pays attention to who are we talking about here, right? There are two groups here. There's the Jews, but there are two other groups, right? You notice that you have the Oivei Yehudim, right? They're the ones who were hoping to lishlot. And then it says that the Jews were sholet not on the Oivim, but on the Sonim, on those they hated. Right? So there's a difference. What's the difference? And I don't know if the Gra figures it out from the words, although I think one might, right? An Oyev versus a Soneh. The Gra says that the Oyev is the person that actually wants to act, and that fits in very well with the word, right? They were waiting for the day that they would act against the Jews, right? But it was reversed, and the Jews dominated, but they didn't dominate the enemies, they dominated the haters. Who are the haters? The ones that cheer on the enemies. They're very happy to see Jews, right? I mean, we know from the Holocaust and all sorts of other situations where people stand idly by, but not only stand idly by, they're happy, they cheer, right? They're not arresting Jews, they're not hurting Jews themselves, but they're very happy, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're having a good time. So according to that understanding of these two words, what happens is very interesting, right? The Jews dominate over the lesser group, the less bad group, right? How does that work? So Gra says that the Oivim don't show up, right? The Oivim, right, they're ready for this day, and they see that things are turning against them, so they simply don't show up. So the Jews, right, are able to take care of the Sonim instead, because the Oivim aren't even there, which is interesting, because if you remember something I mentioned early on about Achashverosh, right? Achashverosh is the master of apathy, right? He's the allower, right? In this story, you have the real villains as the ones who let this happen, right? Persia as the seat of mediocrity, where anything can happen, and it doesn't matter what happens. So it's interesting that the Sonim, right? Granted, it's not everybody. Achashverosh stays on the throne, but the Sonim, the ones that are neutral but slightly less than neutral, internally have a hate for the Jews, but not enough to do anything about it. They're according to the Gra, anyways. I mean, obviously you don't have to learn this way, but according to the Gra, they're the ones that get the brunt of the punishment. Besides, obviously, Haman and his family, which is a very interesting narrative. It's a very different narrative than what you think of. You think about the Oivim, the enemies with the gangsters and the ones with the weapons. They go and hide, but the Sonim get their just due. There's an idea, by the way, that a regular person, as Jews aren't in this category, because Jews are changed by the yoke of Torah, and therefore, if they want to do a mitzvah, we assume that they would do it, even if they can't. On the other hand, if they can't do an avera, we assume that they didn't really want to. By non-Jew, who's not, again, under the discipline of Torah, so we assume that when he doesn't do it, it's not because if he's not able to do it, it's not because he doesn't want to do it. So this is what's going on with Sonim according to the picture that the Gra sets up. Okay, any questions, responses, reactions? No? Okay. So, פסוק ב' נקהלו היהודים בעריהם בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש לשלוח יד במבקשי רעתם, ואיש לא עמד לפניהם כי נפל פחדם על כל העמים. So it's very interesting because here we have possibly a third group. The Gra doesn't really speak about it, but now we have the Mivakshei Ra'atam. We have those who sought their evil. So my guess is it sounds like the Gra is saying those are the Sonim, right? They saw it in their minds. They sought the evil of the Jews, but not in practice. So what happens? The Jews got together, nikhalu, from the word kahal, right? Congregate. The Jews congregated in their cities, in all the provinces of the king Achashverosh, to send their hands, meaning to attack those that sought their evil, and no man stood in front of them. There was no one prevented from doing what they wanted. Again, the Persian police, the bystanders, no one prevented the Jews from doing what they wanted, and the other ones seemed to be helpless, right? So why did no one help the ones that were being attacked by the Jews? Because their fear was upon all of the nations. The fear of the Jews is upon all the nations. Okay. I think what's going on, is that people follow the news, and in Persia, when you have a king who is seemingly inconsistent, you want to be on the right side of his policies. Unless you want to rebel, you want to be on the right side of his policies, so you want to follow current events, and Achashverosh is now clearly on the side of the Jews, so you also want to be on the side of the Jews. That seems to be what's going on. And we see the next verse also supports that idea. V'kol sarei hamedinot v'hashtar panim v'apachot v'oseh melacha asher lemelech menasim et haYehudim ki nafal pachad Mordechai alehem. And all the ministers of the provinces and the other different types of leaders, and the ones that do the royal work that the king had. So all these different types of government officials, they all were raising, right? Minaseim et Yehudim. They were raising up the Jews, right? Meaning they respected and they gave them preferential treatment. Because, and you'll notice that the phrase is very similar to Pasuk Bet, the end of Pasuk Bet. The only difference is the fear is not of the Jews, the fear is of Mordechai, right? That the fear of Mordechai fell upon them, upon all these Persian government leaders. Again, we see from here how the Persian Empire worked. And we saw that with Haman also, right? When Haman had the decree that everybody should bow down to him, right? No one questioned that. They all did as they were told, as they understood the king of Persia to want. And they were afraid, presumably. And given the whole story with Mordechai, they had good reason to be afraid of what Haman would do if they got on his bad side, right? So now they're afraid of getting on the bad side of Mordechai. And like we said before, right, Achashverosh is not interested in government policy. So all he wants is someone to do it for him capably, which gives a tremendous amount of power to that person, whether it be Haman or whether it be Mordechai. Okay, Pasuk Dalet. כי גדול מרדכי בבית המלך ושמו הולך בכל המדינות כי איש מרדכי הולך וגדול. Why were they afraid of Mordechai? So the pasuk continues, because he was great in the house of the king, and his reputation went through all of the provinces, because the man Mordechai went and grew. Holech v'gadol means he grew in power over time. He kept on becoming more powerful. Now this should parallel, right? What did it say about Haman? How did Haman become gadol? Anybody remember? I think it's Perek Bet. Perek Bet or Perek Gimel? No, it's Perek. Yeah, Perek Gimel. Yeah, right. Perek Gimel Pasuk Aleph. Right, so it also uses the shorsh gadal, but there, right, it says that Gidel Hamelech et Haman, right? So there, Gidel, right? He made him big, right? That Achashverosh made Haman big. Sounds like it's instantaneous, right? He goes from being small to being big overnight, whereas with Achashverosh, it's a process. And the Quran that brings Yerushalmi and says that's the way of tzaddikim. Tzaddikim don't make their fame overnight. That's not the way true greatness occurs, right? It's not one great deed, one lucky break. That's not the way of tzaddikim. Tzaddikim live their lives in such a way that it constantly becomes better. I'm reminded of the story of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi when he heard about Elisha ben Darda, I think was his name, who was this really rotten person, and he was going to this prostitute, and he'd gone to every other prostitute. I don't know if this story might sound familiar to some of you, and the story unfolds that he realized he had to do tshuva, and he has this, he cries out to God. I mean, it's a whole long story, but the end of it is he cries out to God so powerfully that his soul flies out, and the Gemara says that a bat kol, voice from heaven came out and said that Rav Elazar ben Dardik, if I have the name right, is invited to Olam Haba. And the Gemara says about that he was able to acquire his world, meaning his world to come, his share in the world to come, in one instant. And that one instant of desperate tshuva, he was able to acquire his share. But what seemed to have gotten Rebbe particularly upset is they called him Rabbi, right? In other words, so what? Why is he so upset, right? So I think because that's not the way of tzaddikim, right? In other words, yes, in theory you can do that, right? That's what this man shows. In theory, a person has the ability of turning everything around if you want it badly enough in one instant, but it's not the way of tzaddikim. And it seems like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was very upset by this, that someone be allowed to cheat, so to speak, to make his life in one instant. But obviously, it was the exception to the rule. That's not the way we try to organize our lives, but rather you have to build a building one brick at a time. That the human psyche is such that is normally what works properly. Anyway, so you have this very interesting contrast. You have bookends, right? You have Haman going up and then down, and Mordechai being down and then up, right? With very similar terms, though slightly different. Okay, Pasuk Hey, V'yaku Yehudim bechol oivehem makat cherev vehereg ve'avadan v'yasu b'sonehem kirtzonam. And the Jews, or the Judeans, if you will, struck all their enemies, right? So I guess it's interesting. Did the grass say anything here? Yeah. I know okay. I'm not sure. It doesn't. I mean, he's aware of what he said before, but he doesn't seem to explain how it works. In any case, um, the Jews struck their enemies with a striking of the sword, of killing, of destroying, and did against their haters, right, according to their will. Another interesting thing that the Gra adds is kirzonam, like whose will, right? So it sounds like the Jews' will, right? But it doesn't have to be. What could it be? Whose will could who else's will could it be?
The haters' will to do on the Jews?
Right, exactly. Good. That's what the Gra said. That's how he learns. That it's all based on perfect midah keneged midah. And if you noticed, right, the words that are used are the same words that Haman used to describe what he wanted to do to the Jews. Although I don't think he said makat cher. That's new. But chereg and la rog la abed were two words that Haman used originally. Okay, so Shana Biram הרגו יהודים ועבד 500 ish. So in the fortress of Shushan, the Jews killed and made waste of 500 people, right? Now, something that's interesting is that we don't see the number of people they killed outside of Shushan, right? We'll see later on, right? It talks about, again, the 500 people in Pasuk Yud Bet, but never gives a number, right? So I forgot who points out that this is, I think the Gemara points out that it's a kal v'chomer, that if the Jews killed 500 people in Shushan, right, which was a relatively small place, so imagine how many they killed throughout the empire. But it's fascinating that the Megillah never gives us a number, in spite of the fact that we've seen that that the Persian Empire seems to be very official and very formal. But in any case, that's what it is. Okay, so then you have the Asar B'nei Haman, right, with the funny letters, right, that are smaller. We're not going to talk about that. Yeah, so I'm not even going to read it because they're tongue. It's a tongue twister. The tradition is for the reader of the Megillah to say it all in one breath, right? Which is hard. I mean, I don't know. That's enough to stop me from learning how to read Megillah. So that seems like a real difficult feat. But okay, anyway. So in Pasuk Yud, Aseret b'nei Haman ben Hamadata Tzorei Yudim Hagu v'Iza lo shalchu et yadam. So these 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamadata, right? By the way, you see that they weren't killed until this battle. They weren't killed along with Haman. Haman was executed for his own thing. His children were very much part of the plot, but they that wasn't part of the death decree that Ahasuerus had against Haman. So in any case, the enemy of the Jews, right? This is interesting, right? That he gets this title, the enemy of the Jews, or the oppressor of the Jews. Did they kill? And they did not send their hand into the booty. So here again, we might say it's because they're Amalek. So that's to be expected. Rega. No, sorry. It's not talking about the booty of the 10 sons of Haman. It's talking about the booty of all the 500 Jew haters in Shushan, and presumably the ones outside of Shushan as well. So then the question becomes, why not? Right? As we said before, there's no indication that these people are Amalek. So much so, if you remember last week, we said that Mordechai, in writing the decree for the Jews to defend themselves, said that they, Dafka, could do whatever they want with their property, right? Which on some level, by the way, is an issue of Baal Tashchit. It may sound funny, but simply leave property lying around to rot is not a good thing, right? Unless it's somehow contaminated. So that would be with Amalek. So with Amalek, it's contaminated spiritually, right? The fact someone's bad doesn't necessarily contaminate their property. You have to be really bad. So the question is, why didn't they do that? And it's interesting that most of the Mefarshim say the same thing. I didn't see. I mean, I didn't see all the Mefarshim, but no one suggests it's because they're like Amalek. So, if you didn't see any of the Mefarshim, what do you think? Why would they not take the spoil if it's perfectly permissible and there's actually an issue of Bal Tashchit, of not wasting property? So why would they not? Why would they not? What do you think?
Maybe it's like not a good me to like kind of be like a pirate.
Sorry, it makes them like a pirate?
Yeah, it's not a good me to, because
Yeah, it's not, yeah, right. So that's interesting. It seems like a bad midah. So I think that's right, but you have to explain that better when you say to be like a pirate. What do you mean? In other words, what's the difference between that and when the Jews, with the war of Midian, right before they come into Eretz Yisrael, right? So they have a war against Midian, and they take all sorts of vessels, right? And that's where you learn about Hagalat Kelim from. It's what's the expression for it? Forgot something Midian. So the Jews took all the property there, right? So why don't we say they're like pirates then? I mean, I'm just using Zeldi's term. You can use a different way of understanding it, but I think it's a useful term. So why would they be considered like pirates here possibly? But in the war against Midian, everybody said that no, it's a military victory. And it's perfectly legitimate to take the things. Not only is it legitimate, it's the correct thing to do. What's the difference?
Weren't they commanded before by Hashem to take everything?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they were commanded to take the stuff. I think it was just a default. They assumed that they could, and then the Torah tells us the laws of what to do, right? In other words, that was the default in the ancient world. You war against another people. It's it's usually total war, right? You destroy the other people. Whoever you don't destroy, you enslave, and you take whatever property you can. That's the rules of classical ancient combat, and the Torah did not say not to do that. Like I said, I think the Torah didn't say not to do that because assuming the war is a righteous war, then just leaving the property to spoil is not appreciating what God gives to you, because at that point it's ownerless. So, but what's here? What's here? What's so pirate-like about this story? So Zelda, I don't know what you had in mind by pirate, but I think that the question is, what is the goal of the war, and what's the accident, or what's the purpose of the conflict, and what is a result of that purpose, right? So in the war against Midian, most wars, the point is not to get spoils, at least when Jews fight, but presumably most nations. Amalek is an exception that could well be part of the problem with Amalek. But in general, it's about taking over land. You want that land. You don't want to be destroyed by them, right? You have legitimate reasons for why people fight wars. Once you've fought and won, you can take the spoil. That's not what pirates do, right? In fact, I used that term for Amalek once, a nation of pirates. Pirates are not there to win territory or defend themselves. They're there. The whole point is the booty, right? And killing the people is sort of a way to get to the booty, right? So take a look, couple what the Mefarshim say, see if it fits in or not. The Eben Ezra, the last few words before Yud Bet, if you remember, he says that he was the one that asked, why do they need to kill all the enemies? Why not just save the Jews? And he answered then that Mordechai was very, very smart, and he understood that he had to work within the existing law. So here he says, Gamzot etzat tova. This is also a clever plan that Mordechai had. She'aita, or whoever, it doesn't say that Mordechai, it simply says the Jews didn't take the property. Whoever thought of it, he says it's a very good plan. She'aita biza lo'otzrot hamelech le'rotzoto. That the spoils, they're going to go somewhere. So where are they going to go? So eminent domain. So you go back to the government. If there's no, right, if a person dies intestate without a will, who takes the property? The state, right? So here too. So says the Eben Ezra, this is very smart because it helps ingratiate themselves more with the king. The king already likes them, but you never know. So rather than taking all this stuff, allow the king to take it instead. So others, like Rashi, say it in a different way. Take a look at Rashi. Shelo yiter hamelech ein sara b'mamon. That Chashverosh shouldn't have a jealous eye towards the money, right? That he should not begrudge them, right? Let's not make it a point of contention, even if it's subconscious. It's not really something Achashverosh is going to raise. And he understands that's the way of the world, of the classical world. You fight, you win, you keep the spoils. But nonetheless, for the Jews to get rich that way, or richer, or whatever, to take all this property that in theory could have gone to the king is not a good idea. I think the Gra says something similar. He says, it's interesting language because they're all variations on the same theme, but slightly different. The Gra says, Kedei la'arot shelo asu b'shvil mamon. Again, in order to show that they didn't do it for the money. What's the main point? To defend themselves, right? The money, had they taken it, that wasn't the point. They're not pirates. They're warriors, or in this case, defenders. And that's why they're fighting. And the mammon they would have taken, but in order to make the message clear, they didn't take it. That's what the Gra says is Rak kedei lekayim gzerat hamalchut. So why did they do it? So why did they do it? To uphold the law of the king. King had a law to defend yourselves. So that's what the Jews did, right? The king's law also said you can take the spoil, but that doesn't interest them because that can be seen in two ways. Of course, defending themselves also can be seen in two ways, that they're not really doing it for the king. Presumably they're doing it for themselves. Okay, let us go on. Where are we? Yeah, okay, so we're on Pasuk Yud Aleph. B'yom hahu ba mispar harogim b'Shushan habira lifnei hamelech. So on that day, the number of the dead came to the king. So the number of the dead in Shushan Habira came before the king. Yud bet v'yom hamelech le'Esther hamalka b'Shushan Habira ha'go Yehudim v'ibed 500 ish ve'et Esther et bnei Hamon b'shar medinot hamelech ma'asu ומה שאלתך וינתן לך ומה ביקשתך עוד ותעש. So we're speaking about before. So the king said to Esther, the queen, that in Shushan, the fortress, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 people and the 10 sons of Haman. In the other provinces of the king, what they did, right? It's I mean, the king told her what they did, but the story doesn't tell us what they did, right? It's just in short form. That presumably it's not important. Again, the point is not the number of people killed. The point is the miracle. So he continues after telling her that. He says, then what is your question? And it will be given to you. What is your request? What more is your request? And it shall be done. Right? You'll notice that the phrase ad chatzia malchut, up until half the kingdom, is not there. That he's at this point seemingly feeling that he's done enough, not in a nasty way, but even to say what more do you want is not necessary, right? He's saying, is there anything else that's still left that I didn't do for you? And Esther has a response in Yud Gimel. ותאמר אסתר, אם על המלך טוב, יינתן גם מחר ליהודים אשר שם לעשות כדעת היום, ואצל בני המן יתלו al ha'etz. So Esther said to him, if it's good for the king, also tomorrow should be given to the Jews that are in Shushan to do like the law of today. And the 10 sons of Haman should be, right, they're dead, should be hung on the tree. Which, by the way, in Torah law also, right? When you hang someone, it's after they're dead, after they've been executed. You don't hang people to kill them. So why does Esther want this, right? We don't see any divine decree that this is what they need to do. Esther is on her own. She has to think of what is the best policy for the Jews. She has an opportunity to do several more things, and this is what she wants. She wants two things. What are the two things? Number one, the Jews should be able to fight the enemies a second day, and number two, that the 10 sons of Haman should be hung. Why? Why these things? What does she accomplish? What does she gain? What do we gain? Is the better question.
To show that we want.
Yeah. So So go with that. How does it show? How does it show more than other things?
The decree was for them to be hung on, well, for Mordecai to be hung, and now it's like flipped, like they are hung instead.
Right. So, but we already have Haman hung on that tree, so that should be the perfect flip, right? It's 1 for 1. Here it's 1 for 11, right? There's one. I don't know if I mentioned to you before that Haman's tree was high enough that you could hang that many people on it. So it worked, sort of this sort of, I don't know if you want to call it poetic justice, but ironic justice. That, yeah.
How do they find all of these enemies?
Right, good question. Yeah, good question. So it doesn't tell us. It sounds like people were planning in a public way. Certainly, before the second decree was put out, I imagine there was some sort of, events to organize themselves so that people knew who they were. Uh, it says they were looking forward to dominate the Jews. So I think that doesn't just mean in their minds, but also practically. Uh, Anyone else? So the Gra here also has an interesting idea. He says that on the books, there's still two decrees, right? One's to kill the Jews, and one's to kill the enemies of the Jews, right? That's on the 13th. So it worked out that the Jews won, right? Everybody likes the Jews at this point. Everybody's rooting them on, supporting them, and especially the government people, which is the most important thing. But no one's standing in front, preventing them. The others are running away, according to Gra. The ones that had the weapons didn't even show up, right? So it's a rout. But the Gra says, well, that's the 13th. What happens on the 14th, right? It's like there were two laws and the Jews won, but who's to say that that this is going to be the permanent situation? So according to the Gra, Esther was trying to find something new that wasn't connected to the old, the first decree of Haman. It's not just simply a parallel law, but it's a new law that shows that the Jews are on top. And certainly in terms of this poll, right, that everybody can see, right, there can be probably no better way to publicize this thing. Haman's already off the tree, I imagine. I don't think they just left his body there forever. Right? Again, with in Jewish law, you keep it up for just a day, then you take it down. Presumably, other people did something similar. I don't imagine. I mean, it gets pretty gross fairly soon. So there's this poll, which apparently is still there. The truth is, we don't even know that it's. I mean, what they say is it's the same poll, but we don't know for sure. But in any case, a poll that's tall enough to hang 10 men is certainly going to be one of the most convincing ways of publicizing where things stand. Right? They're dead anyway, so their death can be used to the Jews' advantage and in a way to make this situation more permanent. Given that the king is who he is, it's not at all clear that this is not just a passing phase. So Esther wants to, she wants to take advantage of this request without going overboard, without requesting half the kingdom, to make the situation as permanent as possible. Okay, let's go on. Lehasot ken v'tinaten dat b'Shushan v'etesed b'nei Haman talu. And the king said to have this done, and the law was given in Shushan, meaning the law of the next day of the 14th day, and the 10 sons of Haman were hung, they hung the 10 sons of Haman. ויקהלו היהודים אשר בשושן גם ביום 14 לחודש אדר, ויהרגו בשושן 300 איש, ובזה לא שלחו את ידם. Second. Yeah. Okay. So and the Jews gathered together. We have the same word. By the way, I don't think it's coincidental that this word is chosen. Vikalu. They congregated. I think it's very significant and important. We'll speak about it next class. The Jews congregated. The Jews that were in Shushan congregated also on the 14th day of the month of Adar. What's missing? the 12th month, right? Remember, all the time we've had the 12th month, the 11th month, whatever month it is, and then the Persian name. Here we only have the Persian name. We'll speak about that next week. Also, Bli Neder. We'll see that a couple more times where the numbers are dropped and we're only having the Persian names. And they killed in Shushan 300 men, and they didn't send their hands into the booty. Okay, so you have the same basic situation. There are less enemies to kill, presumably, right? So instead of 500, it's only 300. Yehudim asher b'medinot hamelach nikalu ve'amod al nafsham v'noach moivehem v'arog besonehem 75 viza lo shalchu et yadam. And in the other Jews, the rest of the Jews that were in the provinces of the king gathered together and stood upon their souls, upon their lives, and rested from their enemies, and they killed their haters. Here it is. Interesting. Okay, so I'm wrong. They killed. I guess only in the report to the king and the report to Esther they don't talk about it, but now they talk about it. So 75,000, and again they didn't send their hands into the booty. Okay, b'yom 13 l'chodesh Adar v'noach ב14 bo. ועשה אותו יום משתה ושמחה. I think we'll end with this pasuk, right? So on the 13th day of the month of Adar, again, we're only talking with the Persian names, and rested on the 14th in it, and they made it into a day of feasting and joy, right? You'll notice that this is just a one-time event at this point, right? Like you graduate, so you don't celebrate your graduation every year. You have a party when you graduate. So here too, they had this tremendous victory, and they're going to celebrate. They're going to have a big party, and that's what is going on here. B'ezrat Hashem, next week we'll see how it goes from this one-time historical event to a celebration and a halakha, a law of commemoration for all time. You have to remember that the Jews fought lots of wars and won lots of wars and had all sorts of happy days. There's a tractate, which is not really a tractate, it's a braita called Megillat Tanit, which is all the different days that were happy days that was forbidden to fast on. So there's a whole bunch of days, and presumably that's not all of them either, but a lot of days come and pass and lose their importance, but Purim will, as we'll see by the end of the Megillah, will become this thing that's so important that in the Gemara they speak about it as being something that never ends, even if and when other holidays are no longer celebrated. Purim is something that is eternal. Okay, we're done with time. Anybody have questions, comments? No? Okay, we'll see you next week, final class. Before we'll have a siyum, we'll have a l'chaim. Be well. Bye-bye. Shavua tov, everybody.
Thank you. Shua tov.
Bye.